Hi, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening for this is our final session of AVCC's 2020 Virtual Conservation Summit. My name is Nancy Everhart. I've had the pleasure and privilege of serving as chair of the board of the Association of Vermont Conservation Commissions for the past 3.5 years. AVCC is a nonprofit organization. Our mission is to support Vermont's conservation commissions and to encourage the establishment of more conservation commissions in the state. We are a membership organization with conservation commissions as well as individuals as members. We've been around since 1990 and we're overseen by a volunteer board of directors. Every year, AVCC hosts an annual summit. We provide tiny grants to conservation commissions. We maintain a website with tools and support for conservation commissions, share success stories, and help promote relevant events. And our work is enabled by Conservation Commission and individual memberships, and we really appreciate all the support from you all. This year, of course, we put a lot of thought into how to hold our annual summit. Clearly, we needed to do it virtually. And we felt like the work of conservation commissions has become even more important during this time when we've all been so challenged with staying safe, staying home, learning how, but keeping connected and engaged. And so every year we try to provide topics and speakers that are interesting and also will help conservation commissions improve their work. So this year, we hope this 2020 virtual summit has met this goal. And our theme this year, no surprise, is conservation in the time of COVID-19. Each session, this is our final session tonight, our keynote, and we've had 4 already, and each session has explored the ways in which our collective conservation work has been impacted by and is relevant to the pandemic we're all living through. So we're really excited to have a dynamic keynote speaker tonight to wrap up our 2020 summit and bring together the topics of our previous 4 sessions, which we've held every 2 weeks since late September. We'll introduce our speaker in just a couple minutes. First, there's a few housekeeping items. Oh no. Am I still connected?
Yes, you are.
Okay, sorry, I'm using a different computer and I panicked for a minute because I couldn't see the screen. So I have that terrible feeling of I'm talking to like my computer and no one can hear me. Yeah, so housekeeping. We, as Stephanie has already mentioned, we are asking people to stay muted and to keep your video on right now because we'll have a short business section, but then you might want to stop the video when our keynote begins. There is going to be, and as you can see, there's the screen is showing you where your microphone is if you're not familiar with Zoom and how to mute it, and also how to stop or start your video. There also is a chat function. And so if you think of questions, there is going to be time at the end of the presentation for some questions. If you think of them during Paul's talk, feel free to post them in the chat, but we'll wait till the end to take those up. And now, let's see, I'm navigating in my one screen. I do want to thank our sponsors before we move into the final presentation. You can see them up there on the screen. I want to give particular thanks to Front Porch Forum, to the Lintillac Foundation, and to the Vermont Land Trust, and to all the other sponsors without which the work that we do is not possible. So we thank them for their generosity. And now, as I mentioned before, I've been serving as chair of the AVCC board for the past several years. I'm leaving that role as well as the board. And I've really want to say how much I've appreciated my years with AVCC. And I feel like the work of volunteer conservation commissions is more important than ever in our state. I've been thinking about this a lot as I've been working from home. I've recently retired. I am lucky enough to live within walking distance of a town forest in my town of Marshfield, the Stranahan Town Forest. And the Conservation Commission in Marshfield was one of the key players that made that the protection and the conveyance to the town and the conservation of that property possible about 12 years ago. And so having that place of refuge that is such easy access for me is something I've been especially grateful for these last several months when we've all been spending so much more time at home. So I just feel really grateful for all the work that Conservation Commission members and other community volunteers who are doing this hard work of protecting and stewarding special places in our towns do. And thank you to all of you, and thanks for joining us tonight. So now I'm really delighted to pass the baton to AVCC's incoming board chair, Mark Nelson. Mark joined the board over 2 years ago. He's also chair of the Ripton Conservation Commission. He brings extensive knowledge and experience, dedication, and passion to this work, and I am delighted that he has agreed to serve as the next chair. I will pass it on to him. Thank you all.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you for that introduction. Actually, before we move on so we've got some brief ACC business to take care of today before we get to our speaker, but I want to take some time to congratulate Nancy on her recent retirement from the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. I'm sure she's going to be greatly missed there, and myself and all of us on the AVCC board, and I'm sure everybody on this call, wish her the best as she and her husband move into the next stages of their life. It's always good when you're fortunate to be able to retire and be healthy and happy, and I know she's got a lot of great plans ahead of her, so we wish her the best on that. And I also want to thank Nancy for your time and your hard work serving as the AVCC board chair for the last 4 years. I joined, as you said, I joined in 2018. I've really enjoyed working with you. So we thank you for your time. We thank you for your hard work, and we wish you all the best in your future endeavors. I see Jens clapping, okay, but if we were in a room full of people face to face, there would be a strong round of applause for you. So thank you for everything you've done. And we do have one piece of business to take care of, and that is we have 2 board members who are standing for re-election, Nancy Jones and Bob Hyams. Normally we'd have them stand up, but we'll just, you can see their pictures on the AVCC website under the list of the members of the board. Nancy serves as the board secretary, and Bob serves as our treasurer. These 2 folks are standing for re-election, and what we'd like to do is what some other organizations have done when they're casting votes using Zoom. Along the bottom of your screen, it's either the bottom or the top. On mine, it's on the bottom. If you move your cursor, you'll see a little icon for participants. If you click on that, it should open up something on the right hand of your screen, which lists you and all the other participants. And then down at the bottom of the list of participants, you'll see a button that says invite, mute me, or raise your hand. What we're going to use is that raise hand icon to vote. So when I call for a vote, if you're in favor of Nancy and Bob remaining as members of the board, just click raise your hand. And we're hoping that we get a majority of the folks who vote yes. So I'm going to ask all in favor of Nancy Jones and Bob Hyams remaining as board members, please click raise your hand.
Everyone gets to vote. That's correct, right?
Yes, everyone gets to vote.
Everyone present gets to vote.
Thank you. So the votes are still coming in. So far, I'm looking and it looks like the majority of the folks
Absolutely.
have voted yes. So Nancy and Bob, congratulations and thank you for remaining as members of the AVCC board. So again, a round of applause for you all. We do have one vacant seat on the AVCC board. The AVCC board, we meet once a month. We are meeting virtually right now, and we were trying to get together at least once or twice a year, but we do have our monthly meetings virtually that allows folks from across the state to be members. So if anyone is interested in becoming a member of the AVCC board, or if you have questions about being a member of the AVCC board, if you go to our website, you'll see an option across the top of the website. It'll say contact us. You can send us an email and we'll get back to you to answer questions or get back to you if you're interested in being on the board. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jens, who will talk to us about how our virtual sessions have been going and introduce our speaker. Jens?
Thanks so much, Mark. And thank you all for coming tonight. It's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Paul Costello. Paul joined Vermont Council for Rural Development as Executive Director in 2000. Paul is a UVM alumni and holds a PhD in Intellectual History from McGill University. In addition to his work at VCRD, Paul is a member of the Housing Vermont Board of Directors and President Emeritus of the National Partners for Rural America organization. He's going to talk tonight about resilience and change, conservation and community in renewed Vermont. And we look forward to how you'll pull together the themes from that have emerged over the course of this fall. Thanks so much for being game to talk with us, Dr. Paul Costello. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jens. Nobody calls me doctor except my friends who want to tease me, but I'll take it from you. Thanks. And thank you, Nancy and Mark, for your service, and everyone for being here. I suspect you wouldn't be here except that you share some really powerful and important Vermont values in the love for the land and for the natural environment, but also the people who work the land and have been its stewards for generations. So it's an honor to be part of this conversation. I'm really a facilitator. I'm not an expert in anything, so you'll have to take everything that I say with a grain of salt. The facilitator is the person who stands in front of the room and listens and tries to bring other people out, and is usually the most ignorant person in the room. And that's kind of me. But I do hear a lot, and I hear a lot of passion from a lot of people in Vermont about the future of the state and some of the current challenges we have. So I'd love to share some of what I hear and how it adds up for me. But I'm looking forward to the question and answer part of the conversation, because I want to hear your thoughts and how the pieces of the work from the different sessions fit together. I haven't been able to attend them all, and I'm fascinated by the layout of how you put the summit together this year. So the Council on Rural Development is a neutral nonprofit. It's charged by the Farm Bill to be a convener. It is, we don't have any particular power, and we don't have any federal money that comes to us automatically, but we have a Farm Bill charge that says that our job is to bring people together at the community level and at the state level to get over differences, to get across politics, to look at the different silos of state government and federal government, and also the differences between different interests, to try to find points of unity for people to move forward and help coordinate rural policy and programs for Vermont. We have a board that has the heads of the congressional offices, the heads of federal programs, half the governor's cabinet, key business leaders, nonprofit leaders, and local leaders, all working together as a team to get out of their silos and serve the people of rural Vermont. Fundamental to our work is we don't sit up on a hill and think we know what's good for other people. We are a listening organization first. So we're probably the most experienced community facilitative organization in Vermont. We've done scores and scores of 6-month-long community organizing processes that we call community visits, engaging tens of thousands of local folks, building 350 or so committees to drive forward everything from conservation to energy development to economic development to redeveloping a particular business building or developing a daycare center. And we're neutral to the process. We believe in the collective wisdom of local folks, that they know better than the federal government or the state government what's good for them. And in fact, no one's coming. No one's going to come from the Biden administration or a Trump administration to tell rural communities what's going to work for their economic future. It's all about local leadership. It's about lining up, taking power, going from the 40 problems that you have at the select board table, or the 40 ideas that you can come up with that wouldn't it be great if someone would do for us, to the things that we prioritize together as a community and we line up behind. We've done these processes from Richford to Rutland to Island Pond to Wilmington, and it's fascinating. Every community is different. Every community is rich in assets and people, and it's the thing that brings us together, and the thing that people turn out for is a deep sense of local patriotism, patriotism for their community, patriotism for the land and the natural assets that are around them. And so we're very, we find a lot of progressive, cool things that come from these kinds of conversations, but we also see that they're really grounded in a very conservative sense of who we are and how we work together and what we stand for. And both those things interacting can help build unity across all kinds of people in the local community. Lincoln called democracy an experiment because it's never done, and it's something that you make in practice. And that's really fundamental to the way we work. We challenge people to step up, to set goals, to line up, and that local patriotism becomes a foundation for our work. We also have this board, though, that looks at everything that is said in these community processes and tries to add it up. So each year we say, what are some of the most fundamental things that we have to work across party lines and out of the silos of government to drive policies that can meet communities with their challenges and where they are? So we've managed year-long policy councils on forest products, on ag development, on the structure of planning, the creative economy, broadband development, in-state energy development, the working landscape. We led the Council on the Future of Vermont, which is the largest scale analysis of public values we believe that's been done in Vermont history. And then the Climate Economy Council. And maybe at the end, I'll have time to talk to you about the current initiatives that we've got going around a proposition for Vermont's future. But fundamental to our engagement in conservation was the work around the Working Lands Council, the Working Lands Partnership, which we manage today. Together, we drew the diagram for the Working Lands Enterprise Program. We advocated for it. We wrote the legislation. We rallied a political partnership to work in a nonpartisan way to advance that. And we've been doing that ever since with a group of people that helps to push to make sure that there's funding to support enterprise development on the land in Vermont over time. We also run the Climate Economy Action Team, which is based on the idea that the answers to climate change aren't just going to be energy policy issues, or they're not all political. In fact, we're inventing a new economy day by day all around us, and we need to set policies and investments to stimulate that economy, to capture market share, in everything from the rollout of electric vehicles to smart grid, battery storage, energy generation, new technologies, and good conservation and land management practices. So we've been working with a political team that does some of that work and reports to the governor and legislature. It's interesting because here we are, a couple of issues that have political points to them, but as a neutral facilitator, the governor asks me to co-lead his Climate Action Commission. And 6 months later, the Legislative Caucus on Climate Action, which has very different ideas on direction and how aggressive to be, invites me in to lead and help them frame their work plan as well. So we tend to want to be useful. We don't tend to think we know better than the people we convene. And we try to help people set good direction so they can get to action. Right now, we're doing that around community leadership. Because fundamental to what we see at the local community level is people who step up. And often they're people, we're working in the town of Greensboro, where the community came together around the idea that the fundamental need they had for the community and economy was childcare. There was really nothing in the area. And a group of young women got together to form the board to develop a childcare center. None of them had ever written a budget. And I'm not sure any of them had chaired a meeting before, but they took power and they led, And so we helped them from the side a little bit. We did a little side coaching, but it's all about them. They own it. And we see that there's another generation of people, and sometimes they're veteran leaders, but often they're newcomers to Vermont, or they're young people just stepping up in their communities. And it's so fundamental that we capture their imagination here and capture the human capital that they bring. So we've set up processes to help organize, to provide training and support for community leaders. And we've actually just published a guide that has taken us almost a year to produce, that's online, and we'll give you a free copy if you want. Any of this, you can find more information at our website, which is at vtrural.org. But we had this big work plan. I'm describing all about VCRD, and suddenly we hit a wall in March, where we were heading to Barrie. We were engaging half the cabinet and the congressional offices and everyone else to come with us as a visiting team to help Barrie set priorities and gear up for a future. And we kept saying, well, we'll wait a month and then we'll start up in Barrie and bring 350 people together for the future of Barrie. And like everyone else, we kind of hit a wall with Barrie. And then we looked at Barton and Mendon and Milton, where we also were geared up to go. And all of our work sort of fell apart like dominoes. And we were there in March wondering what to do next, when COVID was hitting really hard and people were scrambling, literally scrambling at the ground level. So we turned on a dime in a couple of days and said, let's start bringing these people together at the local level who are really scrambling without protocols. They don't know where to start. Some groups are way ahead. Let's start sharing the knowledge from those groups. Let's backbone this thing. And so we started setting up Zoom calls every week. We had 160 different towns participating almost immediately because everyone was wanting to learn. And it brought together and helped to rationalize a lot of the first local recovery efforts that were very unsystematic, but then they hooked together. They started working with the municipalities and so forth. And it was really quite moving. And then we saw a lot of different agencies like CAP agencies and the United Ways and others, including the Housing Conservation Board and others, that were looking for how they hit the ground and where they work together. And we started convening them to talk about how we work together, where there's overlap, where we can be most efficient. And that was a great process, and we're still actually doing it after probably 15 sessions. Then the governor asked me to co-chair his local support and community action team. His perspective on recovery has been that, you know, all the answers for recovery aren't going to come from Washington, D.C., and they're not even going to come from Montpelier. In fact, there are people doing creative things for their downtown in Brattleboro. There's food systems work that's happening in Addison County. There's great work that's being invented in downtown Montpelier. And a lot of the work of recovery is sharing and providing mutual support and learning from each other and encouraging each other to step up and own this crisis, just as we did with Irene. It really is about Vermont Strong, and it's that weaving together of people. So we were charged to go out and support those efforts, encourage them, and be a vehicle to share those stories. And so for the last 14 weeks, we've been running county forums as part of our work, and as well as reaching out to people of color, to historically marginalized folks, to people who we know are hardest hit by the COVID crisis. And it's been an enormous learning experience to be looking into the faces of more than 1,000 people who are wrestling with COVID right now, and hearing one after another story of the hard work that people are doing. Everyone's looking to resilience, but resilience isn't a final thing. It's like sustainability. It's a process. It's not a hard destination. When will we be there? When people look at the COVID challenge, a lot of the thinking that we would hear would be, we're not going back to normal. There's no normal to go back to. Our economy is going to have changed. The way we use technology is going to have changed. we're going to go forward into some new form of dynamic equilibrium, and we should be planning aggressively towards the future. So that's really what I'm interested in talking about. There's no place for rest. In fact, we're going to come out of COVID in a really different place, because the COVID crisis is a crucible to us, but it's not the last challenge we're going to face. And it's a place where, you know, they say you can't waste a good crisis. We're in a crisis that we have to leverage our best unity, our best strength as a people to respond to and step forward, not back. The COVID impact, 59 deaths now, thousands of victims, an already divided America destabilized, parents working from home, daycare closures, schools accompanying tensions on health, lack of stimulation, concern your kids aren't getting enough socialization, business, restaurants, cultural facilities closed, the exacerbation of class, wealth divisions, disparities, and political divisions, encouraged by the bubbles online and on our Facebook accounts that drive us to distraction. An economic crisis where dairy lost $90 million in Vermont in 2 months, and we found $30 million or so to try to cover those losses and what helps them next month. So fundamental challenges, a shift from that 2 to 3 month vision that we had in March for economic recovery. We're going to come out of the response, we're going to go into the recovery period, right? Well, we're still in the response period, and we all know that next year is not going to be an easy year either. The period of the ramp up we're going into, and then today's news, we're in this for the long haul, and we're going to have to stay strong, and we're going to have to look at long-term solutions. But we also know that the impacts were most severe on the historically marginalized, on people of color, on frontline workers, you know, people who are making minimum wage. They're suffering the most, while the stock market has actually done pretty well. And those of us who have any money in the stock market are doing relatively well. And the richest are doing great. You know, the richest are doing great. So we're still at this pitch point between crisis and recovery, and there's stress. You know, we're looking at these 1,000 faces on these calls, and we're doing this right as it's turning to where everyone recognizes this isn't going to go away that quickly, that this is actually a long-term problem that we're going to have. And you see the wear that everyone's carrying and the discipline that they're carrying. And people say stuff like, we're planning diligently and working as hard as we can for a future that's totally uncertain. And that puts everyone under tremendous stress. So it's been challenging. And we all know mental health implications for all of us, depression, alcohol, opioid deaths, even automobile fatalities. When we're not driving as much, fatalities are up. So it's intense, right? Meanwhile, we're seeing tremendous neighborliness, local action groups stepping up everywhere, neighbors helping neighbors, food check-ins, mask work. People are standing up for their community. Arts events, in person, online, you know, the crazy things people are doing, the music around the world, right? But people are doing it locally too. And drive-in concerts, drive-in movies. We have resilient children. Kids are still playing together and they're having fun and they're growing, and parents are finding pods and ways to be creative to get their kids stimulation. We have this deep collaboration and conversation between agencies and organizations to work together effectively right now. We responded to Irene and COVID with powerful cultural and neighborliness as a community practice that's very powerful. We have a new recognition, unfortunate but necessary recognition of racial injustice, privilege, and responsibility, and the imperative for systematic change. And I'd love to hear more about the conversation you had about that in land use. And much as we hate it, we have Zoom, and we have technologies that let us reach lots of people and communicate just as effectively. We also had the VPR poll, which came out about a month ago, Holly. And a year ago, when polled, Vermonters shared a strong sense of optimism about the future of the state. More than 50% were strongly optimistic, and the great majority were optimistic. And I was interviewed on the radio where they said, well, what do you think what do you think people are going to have said this year when they were asked the same questions? And I kind of internally faltered and I thought, well, probably it's not going to be so good. Came out to be very, very close. And why is that? You know, are they just looking at the stock market? No, it's because they're affirming people are not giving in to crisis and they're not surrendering to crisis. They're saying, we're going to work together. We're going to stand tall. And I'm optimistic if we work hard together, we're going to get it done and we're going to be a strong, successful place in the future. So it's optimism by affirmation, I think. And that's an awesome thing because we are in this crucible and we don't choose our time. Aren't we lucky to live in a time of existential purposiveness, where our efforts are lent greater importance and we can think beyond short-term tactics and incrementalism to some of the big things we need to do for Vermont's future. I believe we have to seize the day and lever for this moment for the transformative future of our economy and our communities that we care about. And I also think we have a lot of unity in terms of our values that we can build on as we do that. COVID-19, there's lessons from 19, just as there were lessons from Irene. The immediate lesson, pay attention to science, disease vectors, contact tracing, quarantines, masks, distancing, protecting vulnerable populations, developing treatments, vaccines, right, all that. The second lesson is don't be prepared to be resilient to the last threat, but to the next. We'll always need to be paying attention to viral mutation. You know, since 1977, when William McNeill wrote Plagues and Peoples, it was all very clear, the history of disease migration as a public concept, and that this is an inevitable part of what you need to guard against throughout the future history of humankind. But we also need to be aware of cyber terrorism and what it could do to the electric grid. What happens if everybody's refrigerators and heat stops? You know, these are reality things that we need to be prepared for. And there's others that we actually know are coming because science tells us there will be catastrophic cascading impacts from climate change. They're already here with wildfires in the West at an unprecedented level. Floods, desertification, the Ogallala Aquifer is drying up. And this is happening all over our country and all over the world. Many places globally have populations that exceed the ecological carrying capacity in these circumstances. We know sea level rise is going to displace people in South Asia, in Florida. The drying of the West and Midwest is going to put pressure on food systems all across the country. And because we help to feed the world, it's going to put pressure on the world. I don't know if folks have read the book The Overstory by Richard Powers. The whole book's about love of trees. And in the center of it, he asks a question, which is essentially a conservation question to me. Everyone asks, are we consuming the resources of our ecosystems faster than they can be replenished by natural processes as a world civilization? Probably everyone in that book said yes. Open to interpretation, but it's a good question to be asking as we think big around the future of the world and the future of Vermont. All signs say that conserving the productive land base and environment in Vermont is absolutely imperative to our collective future today in a way, and in a more pointed way than ever in our history. So sorry to be dramatic, okay? But this is big stuff. So we've been looking at resistance, resilience, and economic renewal, and we're releasing a report to the governor tomorrow that this will prefigure a little bit. But you know, there's short and middle term needs for Vermont to be successful in the future, and one of them is universal broadband, with not just the hard infrastructure, but we also have to take a hard look at our civic infrastructure and our economic infrastructure. How do we use broadband? We have Front Porch Forum. It's awesome to see them as a sponsor. And we've worked really closely with them to bring them to all parts of Vermont. But how do we look at the digital side of building civic dialogue that is real, that's fair, that's democratic, and that doesn't build hysteria and negativity and demonization of people in different camps, but actually helps us think and know each other and become closer. That's a fundamental problem that we absolutely have to be addressing. On the other side, what does broadband do? Well, it often lets you purchase from Amazon and your dollars are exported, and economically, you're extracting the resources of your community to the global capitalist network. Nothing against capitalism per se, but what does it do for downtown Barrie? How do we look at the way that we use the internet to cycle dollars locally, to click local, as they were saying at Front Porch Forum, to turn the attention through the net to local purchasing and local people and local support. And that's another fundamental thing. Also, we need to look at childcare, and everywhere you go, and all those thousands of people that we heard from in those calls, childcare was everywhere in that conversation. And it's brought to a point by this, but from a long-term economic lever, it's the point. We need to cover economic losses today, like the CARES Act has been doing, but that's really not enough, because we need to be looking at our place in the world economy 10, 20 years out. And now's the time to be making doing that kind of thinking. We need to look towards an economic transformation that begins in the land-based economy and is fundamental to our long-term success, that builds towards a zero carbon future. And this kind of talk could have been seen as radical at one point, but it's just like motherhood and apple pie. It's just kind of like to me, it's become a self-evident truth that science is telling us. So do you wait and be at the end of the train, or do you look from a capitalist point of view to seize market share in creativity on the front end and benefit your communities and answer some of the economic doldrums that we had before COVID to look to the future? Fundamental to the economic transformation we need to go through is a relocalization of ag. And that doesn't mean destruction of our creative potential to meet opportunities in the global economy. It says that when you think about our economic foundation, the foundation of our resilience and the soul of Vermont is in our land. The Council on the Future of Vermont, which we managed, did some deep polling of Vermonters, and it found that of all the things that were said in the hundreds of forums that we put together and that were polled by thousands of people, the #1 ranked value was the working landscape and its heritage. It defines our state. It's central to us. And that working landscape is not an accident of history. It's not a natural environment alone. It's the result of the hands of working Vermonters, of family decisions, of sacrifice, of risk, of sweat equity, for generations of Vermonters, all the way back to the Abenaki. We've always had some impact on the land. And what we have today is the result. We built the Vermont Working Landscape Council, which did a 40-year analysis, an evaluation of agriculture and forestry. What have all the studies said in the last 40 years? If you line up those studies and you look at all the points of decision and what they point to, they always point to the same two things, which is we need to lead value-added development and diversification of agriculture as fundamental to our future, to capture creative markets. We have to return dollars to the land. We're not going to save Vermont's working landscape by fiat, and we're not going to save it by public purchase. We also don't want to save it as a Disneyland for the well-to-do. That's something we heard through the Council on the Future of Vermont constantly. We need to build a strong working lands economy with innovation, entrepreneurism, creative new enterprises that capture new markets, meet needs globally, but also increase local support. It's like the same is true of the forest product side. We once went on a tour of a factory in Vermont that was pulling beds out of boxes made in China from wood cut on the Russian taiga, no environmental restrictions, paying $3 an hour. They were paying an hour to the laborers in China what we paid for workers' comp in the United States, in Vermont. So they could buy those beds for the price of the wood in Vermont. And we're shipping 50% of our logs out of the state or more now. Sometimes we're shipping them as far as China. They're getting processed and coming back through Lowe's. We got to make some hard decisions about the relocalization of production and capturing the highest end value and using creativity to have products that will sell in Vermont and in national markets. Dairy is another major issue for the long-term future. We want dairy farms to survive and thrive. But dairy, you know, when you look at Vermont as an ag state, historically, we've been the most dependent state on a single ag commodity, which is the dairy economy. And we're in an international capitalist economy that makes you fight for the bottom of the dairy, of the milk economy when it goes into a fluid milk market. Vermont isn't going to win the battle for the lowest place to produce, lowest cost place to produce, because we're going to pay people a living wage. We're going to have environmental management. We're going to control to clean up our waterways. So we need to look at creative efficiencies. We have to capture value in the chain. We may need to look at vertical integration and partnerships. Will Ben & Jerry's someday own the dairy farms that it serves? I'm not promoting it. Roger Albee and Dan Smith recently did a dramatic presentation on the rapid expansion of dairy processing in the state of Vermont, which has been a tremendous benefit to the state. And the potential for that to expand even further to where there's enough production in Vermont that Vermont producers could cooperate to raise the price that gets back to the dairy farmer, like the Dairy Compact, but at the Vermont scale. It's a stretch, but we're going to need to think creatively in ways like that, because again, we have to return money to the land. We can't just be extracting it, and we have to take care of the people who are working the land as primary. This is going to be a transition. Chuck Ross, former Secretary of Ag, says that the greatest conservation is a working farm. And we need to be supporting the profitability of farms. We also need to think, like they did when they developed co-ops back in the day, about mutualism and the way that Hardwick raised the flag, and they shared resources, they shared distribution, they lent each other money. How Jasper Hill taught its neighbors how to make cheese, to do something bigger than they could ever do by themselves for mutual benefit and mutual growth. There's an enormous opportunity. Right now in Vermont, before COVID, we had tremendous burgeoning of the local foods market. We've gone from 5% of the purchasing that we do to local foods to almost 14%. That's in 8 years. COVID is putting greater urgency on this than ever. And it's going to, I think, help to condition the choices we make about invention and investment. Because we can be the land of milk and honey for New England. We can be the cheese board, the bread basket, the vegetable plate, and the beer tent for New England. We've got the resources, and we're going to need it. We're going to need to. The Oglala Aquifer and the desertification of California is going to make it much more important that we're growing a greater share of food. With that, we have a tremendous opportunity, because young people are attracted to the wholesomeness and the work of the working landscape today. There are 300 young people on the list waiting to connect to the land at the Vermont Land Trust now. We also have people of wealth and property who live in Vermont, who have philanthropic commitment, who we could be thinking of as we think about the future of conservation. We don't just want to conserve hillsides. We want to conserve ways of life. We want to conserve opportunities for families. We want to build the next generation of community on the land. And sometimes that's going to mean partnership between landowners, people of wealth, and new stewards that may not own the land, but may be given beneficial leases so that they can be successful in place. And I think there's a huge opportunity for convening to advance that kind of work. The other part of the land use thing before I go on is just how critically important the land management is in an age where it's like, I'm sure when you talked about water, you talked about the fact that even if you cut phosphorus emissions to 10% next year with a magic wand, you still have the phosphorus that's already reached the lake and is a pool of charged nutrients that are going to continue the eutrophication of the lake for a while. They're not going away. When you think about carbon in the atmosphere, it's similar. We can't stop climate change just by reducing our energy emissions. We're going to also have to, as Paul Hawken has said so eloquently, we're also going to have to draw down. We're going to have to bring carbon out of the atmosphere. And the greatest way to do that, and the most beneficial to the planet, is to put it into the soil and grow better crops, improve your soil as you, and the opportunity to systemically promote carbon in the soil as a societal practice in Vermont and in the world is just incredibly profound. So that's something we're all going to be working on, I'm sure, as we think to the future. I want to turn a little bit away from this, but just close by thinking about the regenerative agricultural movement, which is also it's coming, and it's going to be a strong point of renewal for the future. We've got other conservation issues that don't look like conservation issues, though. Vermont is becoming a remote worker destination. We've seen the prices of housing in Vermont go up 23% this year over last year. We've seen people wanting to purchase homes on the hills in Stowe, in Topsom, in small towns throughout the state, anywhere they can get broadband, because people are leaving. I have friends from California who are watching wildfires and saying they want to be in a safe place for the future that has good values, has strong community. Same thing's happening in COVID affected places all around the country where we look awfully good. The digital economy is going to allow people to work in San Francisco or Paris from their home base, just as we're working from our home bases right now. We're already seeing a wave of immigration. The challenge is, and that's a great opportunity, it can help fill our schools. A lot of people are bringing children, a lot of people are bringing their businesses with them, and they can do their business wherever they are. So there's an answer to some of our demographic challenge and our school challenges, but there's implications for smart growth, because Vermont doesn't want to be a place that sprawls in and uses its agricultural and forest resources and undermines its natural resources. It's going to be critical to be preserving and conserving lands as we go. And we also need to ensure that we have strong regional planning and that we add up our regional plans through a central planning office in the state of Vermont in the future. We really need to look at how these things work together. We also need to be projecting outward 3 to 5 years. What's our ag development plan? What is our plan for economic development and land use over time? How do we look long-term at issues like broadband and technology change and get ahead of those issues? We used to have a state planning office. I believe we need one. I think another issue with the demographic shift that we're looking at is around class and cultural divide. A lot of people in Brattleboro, there's a whole movement to systemically advertise that they are a place that is an anti-racism area, and to systematically reach out to people of color to invite them into their community as an answer to some of the economic doldrums, as a way to build creativity and to renew the region's economy. And yet those that isn't the population necessarily that's coming in the COVID crisis. It's people of wealth. It's people of generally white people who have the money to move from one place to another. So we're going to need to look at the challenges around how we invite people to Vermont. And I think that Brattleboro is on to something, that that there's a fundamental opportunity in opening Vermont up and in building an invitation to what it means to be a Vermonter. And I'll come back to that a little bit. I talked a little bit about the climate economy. We're in a competition for young people, for innovation, for enterprises, for entrepreneurs with people in rural places all across the country. But we're also in a competition with Mumbai, Taiwan, San Francisco, to be developing technologies and to be modeling practices. And in fact, Vermont is even though we have a long way to go, we've got some amazing businesses in smart grid development, in our utilities, in what Mary Powell stood for and what Velco has come to stand for, around distributed generation, storage, utility, and grid management, and the fact that in a distributed energy system, you no longer have the smokestacks in one place and the homes getting power on a one-way street. You have a facilitator that's the utility that is balancing energy that we're all contributing to and we're all taking from and we're all storing and participating in, so that we can electrify and go much cleaner and also have energy part of our family economy in a really different way. We're on a roll towards that, but it's going to have revolutionary implications over the next generation, especially as we electrify transportation and heat, which are the big contributors right now to climate change challenges. And all that's going to improve our lifestyles and well-being. So there's a huge opportunity. With this, I think that there's the whole problem that we have nationally right now with our division and even in Vermont, the division between the two Vermonts that is fundamental to us too. We really need to look at how we renew our civic structures and renew democracy. We respect the discussion that people are having in our southern counties. And, you know, at VCRD, we're proud, like I started talking about our patriotism of place and that whole thing. We have so much to be proud of, but so much to improve on. When we did the Council on the Future of Vermont, we interviewed, 1,000 people, and we asked them what it meant to be a Vermonter, or what do you value about Vermont? And everyone would say, well, I moved here because Vermont stood for something to me, or I moved here to be part of community, or I moved here because I wanted to walk out my back door and participate in nature. But I'm not really a Vermonter because I've only been here 18 years. Or, I'm from a 6th generation farm family. We're real Vermonters. And those folks are real Vermonters. You hear everyone make the joke, well, my kid was born across the river, raised here in Vermont the whole time, but I guess he's not really a Vermonter. And it's a joke, like you can't bring kittens out of the oven, whatever that thing is. But it's a joke that actually cuts people out of being recognized as full participants in our Vermont community. And who gets to be a Vermonter? How do we make a hard identity around that? The Council on the Future of Vermont, this one guy in Brookfield said, I moved to Vermont and I joined the fire department. And then I felt like I was a Vermonter. And to me, it's sort of like anyone who's interested in moving to Vermont, we need to shake their hand day one and say, welcome to Vermont. You're part of us. And to be a Vermonter is to be a person who contributes and is part of our community. And there's a real power in opening our vision and campaigning for a new Vermont around that, around this very question, around our question of identity and inclusion. And I think that we're going through a period of incredibly rapid change and growth around this that is really encouraging, because we're going to look at a period where we grow, where our energy, our creativity, our arts, and our leadership is radically improved by a deeper inclusion of people, many of whom move here over the next few years. So I'm very excited about it. I want to conclude with just a couple of observations based on some of the things that we see at the community level. We often find, you know, that there are communities that are relatively happy, and there's communities that are really struggling. You go to some towns and the conversation is always about the glass being half empty, and that there are so many problems, and they may be paralyzed by their problems. They endlessly circle the problem statement. And when they talk about their issues, they don't just talk about the current ones, they just add another problem to the side. And it's paralyzing. And we can do that ourselves. We can do it as people. And sometimes you see people that get in the cycle of the political scenarios that we've been living in, and they add in one more bad thing that they heard as though to prove a point that they've already made, we've proven it 100 times. And as though complaining or blaming was enough to feel like you've done your part. And that's really a negative cycle that we sometimes fall into culturally right now. We also have a couple of others that are really concerns. We worked with the 4 towns that had been seen the potential for a major immigration recently, and where people were coming together and talking about, in some ways for the first time, how they pull together and work together as communities. And I remember the principal of Sharon Academy describing what he saw in his very, very rural community and in the really rural families of this wave of anxiety disorders that their kids were having, that their kids were deeply unnerved, that they're participating in this culture of video games, TV, movies, zombies, end of the world scenarios that are such central, if sometimes not taken seriously, as some of the key motifs of our culture. And I was really disturbed and taken by that notion when I left that meeting. And a couple of days later, I was in a cocktail party where adults were joking about climate change and how the shit's going to hit the fan in about 20 years and it's going to be an end of the world scenario. And it's kind of like light talk. But their 8-year-old children were in the room, 10-year-old children in the room, and they're hearing their parents saying, we're going to fail. They're hearing their parents say, we don't have control of this, and we don't feel like we can, or we won't. And we've got to be the adults in the room. We've got to tell our kids that we're building the answers to climate change one step at a time, right here and right now, that we're going to get through that, just as we're going to get through the pandemic. We need to speak in front of our young people with conviction that we have values and that we share those values with other people, and we are not paralyzed by negativity or defeatism. We have to have some faith in recovery, renewal, resilience, and that if together we get to work at the scale that's necessary, we will be successful. There's no room for ironic complacency or defeatism at this point in our culture. We need to have some confidence and take personal leadership that democracy requires of us. we need to build and make proof a narrative of success. We have to get over politics and demonization, hesitation, and weakness, and use moral courage, creativity, neighborliness, and democracy as a gear to collective action right here and now for the common good. We will. We will. So I'll close with that, and sorry to be so melodramatic, but would love to hear questions, observations, and thoughts. And I'd also love to hear from people about how the threads of some of these earlier conversations went, and maybe if there are findings that thread through here beyond what I would have thought. I'd love to learn from you all. So thanks.
I'll go ahead and just read from a couple questions that have come in on the chat. John Boughton writes, you note that folks are buying homes in the hills to work remotely as long as they have broadband. Does not the opportunity of your universal broadband then endanger unfragmented forests? Comments, solutions beyond town planning, which can be bullied by wealthy individuals?
I hope not. I think that that we do live in a democracy, and we do need strong planning, and we need to invest in conservation to prevent some of that from happening. We can't control the motives of individuals, but we can control the public policies that condition what happens in terms of land use. So I wouldn't be giving into it, but I do think it's going to be an issue. On the other hand, you know, it could be an important contribution to economic vitality in Vermont in the future as well. And I don't know if you can put up a border wall. You know, it's like we have to be open to new people. At the same time, we have to look to not just have things happen to us, but what's in our power of action to condition the best outcomes we can around those issues.
Neat, thank you. Heidi writes, is there a way we can begin to work on an economic structure which is more sustainable for human communities and especially for natural communities? I'd add to that some thoughts on sort of scale. You know, what's the right scale for that economic structure?
Well, I think a lot of people are. I think a lot of people are thinking about it. And I think people in the regenerative ag movement are modeling practices. I think people in the climate economy who are looking at environmental solutions to some pretty complex problems are contributing. Is there a whole that is a top-down approach to how you implement all that? I don't know. I don't think so. I think it's a lot of steps of work of people modeling change and conditioning the economy. But I also think that the Agency of Commerce, that as we look at the future, the way that we use tax funds, as we use public resources, there's this kind of fundamental thing that happens in the economic development world where economic developers often think that all businesses are equal and we can't choose winners and losers. And I've heard a Secretary of Commerce years ago say, our job is to answer the phone and help whatever business comes to us. But the fact is not all businesses are equal, and they're not all producing equal environmental, social, cultural results at all. And some businesses are helping us by building sectors that are essential to our future, like sustainable agriculture or the smart grid, that can be incredibly important to our vitality and our sustainability and a strong natural environment in the future. And we need to be investing our resources and conditioning our choices to build an economy that models things that are going to be have that kind of long-term positive benefit to the society.
Great. Would you please share some ideas folks have used to bring people of divergent opinions or classes, tribes together?
You know, in every room there's differences, right? I'm sure even in the conservation circle here, there's people who have very different perspectives. There's probably Republicans and Democrats. The thing that I always try to say is, you know, you come to a table that's not going to work. It's often not going to work because you start with what you disagree with. It's almost like politics, right? When you go into a political conversation and your job is to win, you're immediately looking for advantage in the conversation over. But when you're looking for progress together, you say, let's think about what we stand for together to start. Let's not demonize each other to start. Let's hang up our guns and let's look at what are some common points of mission that we share in this room. And so you start with a bit of a vision and you look at the things that you don't agree on as work to be done at some point, but you start working on the thing that you have power over and that you see as common. When you have a conversation like that, even in its imperfection, it's like democracy in action. The table rises a little bit and people don't make choices to do things that aren't small p progressive. Like if you're acting for your community, almost inevitably you're doing something progressive. And conservative and liberal people often can agree on some of what those things are, if asked and included and seen as equals at the table, instead of having one group talking down to the other. As soon as you start talking down to each other, you're either going to turn defensive or you're going to feel insulted and you're going to walk away. So you have to start by looking at what's the point of bridge? What's the mental furniture you share? What do you love together? And often it has to do with beautiful environment. It has to do with the land, it has to do with family, you know, and so you build from the best things sometimes.
You know, our session on land access, Chief Donald Stevens of the Abenaki spoke, and two of the tidbits that I pulled out of that conversation that he was talking about, one was a town forest in Barton, a tribal forest in Barton, and how he took the concept of the town forest and said, well, why can't we apply that as a tribal forest for Abenaki people and use the tools of the easement to create this cultural landscape, recreate, I should say, a cultural landscape. And I was fascinated by that choice of use of tools, of easements and access as a first step to regain control of access to land. The other tidbit he spoke about was the importance of naming. And he did give a shout out to Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department and willingness to work on some of the names of reserves and honor an original naming system. And that was one of the ways that he spoke about building that bridge that you talk about and finding that more common ground is through that mutual respect that the naming offered.
Terrific stuff.
Great. Holly writes, Paul, you're a convener and the Vermont whisperer that finds common ground. How do you recommend taking steps to build bridges after this divisive election?
Oh, that's a good one. You know, I think about it a lot. I have colleagues in state rural development councils across the country that are in places that are redder than Vermont, and their politics are really different than Vermont politics. And I think that there are things that I guess I have like this, You know, it's like you can go into a conversation with your cynicism on your sleeve. And if you look for the worst in somebody, you're going to find it. But if you look for good in people, you usually find it. And actually, when you look at who's the happiest people around you, they're usually the people who find good in everyone around them, and they bring it out of them, right? So I think there's political machination that's just plain ugly, and that is not, and we are endlessly cycled in the worst of it, endlessly in everything adds on to how horrible it is. But not everyone is horrible. And we're going to have to go through periods where we try to understand each other better in lots of different ways. And that means some convened conversations. I'm actually at the Partners for Rural America meeting yesterday. We talked about how we could be connecting and reaching out to senators on both sides of the aisle in the future, partly because neither side has had a strong platform for the regeneration of rural America. And when you look at the map of the election, it clearly shows that rural America is fundamentally important to the balance of power in the country, as well as to everything from energy generation to sustainability and a strong natural resource future for the country. And so there are places where you can find political points of common ground, and there are other places where we really need to look at what people care about. The fact that they care about their families, they care about their land, they care about some of the same things we do. And, you know, I think it's like any difference, you have to go out with your hand out and reach out to recognize the humanity in other people first, instead of seeing them just as opponents first. So naively, that's the way that we work, and we tend not to make enemies because we don't celebrate bad things. We always celebrate good things that people do.
Well, there's several notes of thanks for an excellent talk. Nancy Everhart writes, "Thank you, Paul. So encouraging to hear your words of hope and conviction and be reminded of the toll that negativity takes on us all." Phyllis was hoping for a little bit more information about, can you be more specific about the assistance that your organization might provide a Conservation Commission?
We tend, you know, we don't have funding. We don't have money to give out. We don't tend to serve a particular community group. I see Susan Houston's on the phone. I think that in the town of Craftsbury, when we brought everyone together and we talked about what's most fundamental to the future of Craftsbury, one of the things that people pointed to was the conservation of the land. And they had tremendous momentum built to support the conservation work that people like Susan were leading, and we're ready to go to the next level. And so it wasn't us telling them they should do that. We're a convener, and the good values tend to spring forward and get, in a way, consolidated and supported, and task forces move forward. And I think some of that happened there, but it's happened in many other communities that we've worked, because it's something that's natural. So we don't do a lot of direct service like that. We're either convening in policy, or we're convening community by community to help them drive forward the things that they choose.
Have any communities put together the major changes in school structure, the influx of climate, COVID migrants, and land use? I've wondered if this is a time for resettling areas, in my case, Addison County, and rewilding, setting aside areas for human settlement, ag, and then letting others go back to nature.
It's a great question. I think people are seeing it in pieces, and I'm not sure who the question came from, but it's people who think that way that have to help other people see that framework. We tend not to be framework builders because we are convening up, but we are doing this major convening where, based on everything we've heard from COVID and the 10,000 people who've been in our communities, and we've just recently interviewed 70 some odd people, former governors, young people of color in Vermont, some key business leaders. And we're going to be opening up a set of presentations and discussions with scores of groups of people to ask about what are some of the fundamental things that we need to stand for, and how do those things work together as we think about a strong, resilient, and renewed Vermont after COVID. We're calling this the Vermont Proposition Project. It mirrors the Council on the Future of Vermont, but much less about values and much more about what do we need to do over the next 3 years to be successful over the next generation. We think that there's a lot of unity actually around what some of those things are. Like, we need to have universal broadband in Vermont. We need to have universal childcare structure and opportunity for families. And that if we pull together these signposts, and some of them connect with sustainability and the way that that Addison County person framed those things, there are threads between them. And we're basically planning to put up some flags, see how they're received and how they're changed by input, and ultimately build a nonpartisan political movement to advance them. So a huge initiative for a small organization, but we have a lot of partners and want to be useful as a foil for this conversation.
Vermont is not a wealthy state in its public resources. I'm deeply involved in the agricultural industry, and I worry where the investment is going to come from to restructure our industry. Any thoughts?
It's a great question. I think there's lots of, it's a very, very complicated question, because some things are about practice that can potentially be profitable over time. Like the whole energy renewal possibilities in Vermont, you know, that we could be saving money on energy by growing more of our own energy. There may be opportunities connected to farms to do some of that work. Good practices on a farm in a regenerative cycle may cost less in some places to institute than the kind of tillage that we've done in the past. And the scale of, and the other question he had raised, I think, was around scale, that there are ways at smaller scale to do more production per acre in a way that meets an immediate local market need and sustains a family, that may be much more a much more beautiful and fulfilling lifestyle than participating in large scale commercial agriculture of the past. So there's a lot of opportunities for change, but I don't have the, you know, the other question is, to me, around economic disparity in this country. Years ago, very conservative friend of mine who was a Secretary of Agriculture, a supply side person, said, when you look at the history of the world and you look at Republican forms of government in world history, there's never been a Republican form of government that has survived the economic disparity that we have now. And this was almost 20 years ago. So when you think about the disparities between tax policy in the Eisenhower years and tax policies today, you think about other countries and their policies. You know, we're not Scandinavia, but maybe there's a middle place to be. I think there's going to be a big national soul searching around everything from race to poverty. And I think that we're due to have that conversation. In the 60s, we had a war on poverty. That war has become a truce. And when we think about the fundamental things we have to do as a society to be successful in the future, a number of them are going to require investment. I'm speaking as an individual, not for the Council on Rural Development, but sometimes you have to bite the bullet and invest for return, the kind of return that you need for the sustainability of our civilization and for the viability of our families and for the creativity of the business solutions that we need to be building to be successful in the marketplace of the future. Other places do.
Thanks. Paul, Joshua Beanthright, what are your thoughts on using urban growth boundaries to protect working lands?
I don't have a hard, he knows more about it than I do probably. When we did the Vermont Working Landscape Council, we evaluated the idea of actually trying to institute municipally enacted boundaries to preserve agricultural lands from a local democratic decision-making process. I know in Oregon, they've done it in a much more bold and aggressive way. I wouldn't present an opinion of my own off the top of my head, but I think that work is worthy of thinking about as we look at long-term planning. When they built the the Commission on Vermont's Future under Madeline Kunin in 1980, and they basically built up the VHCB structure and the regional planning structure. They also built a state planning office, and they had a structural idea of developing a state land use plan and a state land use map that would look at least preferred areas for conservation, for natural areas and so forth. And it didn't ring politically, and it was taken down. I personally think that was an error. I think that we need, if you're going to make decisions like for the 7th generation, sometimes you have to be thinking far enough out ahead, out of the 2-year budget cycle or 1-year budget cycle, 2-year gubernatorial cycle, that when you think about what happens with the political process in Vermont and in so many other places, it's all about tactics. It's like, what can we get done this year? The whole debate about the refurbishment of Act 250 is, well, here's the increment that we can manage right now, so let's do this. And it ends up that we govern by increments, and we don't think holistically about the big picture. We don't have a 5-year plan for anything in terms of where our economy could go. What are our key opportunities? What are the things that we could be doing, that we could be starting now, framing now, building as platforms that we could be using for the next several years to support agricultural transitions and creativity? Those things become tactical sidetracks and small line budget items. I'm sorry to say, instead of thinking at a transformational level about what we want to accomplish and then carrying through year to year to make it happen. And it's not easy, but there are places in the world that do that better than we do.
We wanted to follow back up on a question about how your organization could provide assistance to conservation commissions, and just clarify that question wasn't about financial resources, but more along the lines of, how do you come into a town as a convener? What are the sort of inroads that VCRD, ways that VCRD gets involved in a community, and maybe talk a little bit about the Leadership Institute.
Okay. We often are, we're connected to the congressional offices. We're close with all the RDCs and RPCs. We are constantly hearing about communities that where there's a group of 15 volunteers who rotate through the select board and the library board and the other town commissions, and they do all the work of the town. And they're tired. And they may not be very proactive because they don't have a lot of additional energy. And the community feels flat to a lot of people. And they're inviting us not because they want to advance conservation per se, or the economy per se usually. It's that they have too many ideas and they don't know what to do and they don't have the energy to do it. And they also haven't engaged the community to take leadership and do it themselves. So we look for communities that aren't in a crisis or anything. They're not in a war, but they're restless. And there's this dynamic that happens in small towns where those people who are doing all the work, they sometimes are actually resentful and they think nobody else will step up. And then the younger generation and others who have energy look at them and they say they don't need or want our help. And if we step up, they're gonna think, who am I? Who's that person to step up? And so the community visit process engages all those people. Even in a small town, when we worked with Craftsbury with Susan, there must have been 200 people from Craftsbury involved in that process. It was an awesome, inspiring thing to watch. And in that process, they define key things they want to do. They wanted to expand conservation. They wanted to build a partnership between Sterling College, the Outdoor Center, and their school system to provide enrichments and experiences, not just for the kids, but for the whole community working together. And so every town's different and they come to different points of decision, but then they line up 20 people on each committee. When we did this with Rutland, we had 450 people coming to meetings, 200 of them volunteered, and they built the biggest engine of community action that they've had in a couple of generations, probably. Wicked inspiring to see. So the thing that's fascinating is the 15 or so people who normally have been doing all the work tend to love it. They tend to love the fact that there's this new energy and new things happening. They want to support it, but the great thing is there's some 25-year-old woman with kids who's running that new task force, or there's a person who's a retired CEO who's running the effort to bring a bank to their community, whatever it is. And that is exciting that these people who've been relatively unknown are suddenly stepping up as community leaders. So the difference between a community that doesn't have priorities and is flat and a community that has a sense of direction is a momentum that every single person feels. Everyone in town knows there's stuff going on. And when there's nothing going on and there's no leadership, everyone knows it. So when people are engaged, it's very uplifting. And it also says, this is a place you want to be. So when young people are looking for a place to live, they're hearing about Greensboro and Craftsbury and Hardwick. They're attracted to these places. And it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy that these places are become more creative and more exciting to be in. It's about renewal. And the renewal comes from people in democracy. When you think about democracy, it's not about just voting once every 4 years for president. It's how do I interrelate with the people around me in our shared sovereignty for the common good? And it may mean being on the library commission, but it may be that there's an issue that needs to be moved forward and that the whole town has prioritized for action. And you have an opportunity to step up as a member of that committee or even chair it. And suddenly you're a leader. You may not be authorized by anyone, but by everyone around you who sees that you're useful. But that's so fundamental. And you think about all the people who stepped into leadership positions. Often they were drawn in because they were working on something and they were good at it. And so we're trying to set up lots of opportunities for people to do that. But we also see a lot of people who are stepping into those positions that need to feel like they can do it. The thing with the young women building a daycare center in Greensboro, they didn't need someone to talk down to them and give them all the facts and expert advice about what childcare is about and the stages of development or anything like that. They needed someone to say, wow, look what you guys are doing. You're doing a great job and you're going to succeed. They had the skill set. but they needed to know that it made sense, that they needed to test it with somebody who'd say, yeah, there's ways you'll find funding for that. Be glad to help you think about your next meeting and how you structure it, or help you, I'll look at a budget for you. But they didn't need an expert to take charge. And in fact, so a lot of our work is not about taking charge. It's not about us leading. It's about us supporting others who step into power, and power to do something good, even at the smallest level. And a lot of those people will, you do it once, you want to do it again. And it's fun, and it's uplifting, and it's good for your soul. So to us, when we think about democracy and the fabric of democracy, it's these people, it's everyone, it's all of you who have stepped up for your community and for conservation. You build this fabric that is bigger than any of us in terms of the opportunity for progress for this place we all love. Excuse the preachifying again.
Thanks so much. So that's it for questions on the chat. I'm gonna read just two more things that have come up. One is a note from Betsy Hands. Just thanks, Paul and AVCC, for hosting this broad-reaching vision and conversation. Heidi Willis from Salisbury just wrote back in. Thank you, Paul, for this thought-provoking presentation, and thank you, AVCC board, for this very creative annual summit format. I was able to attend most of the sessions and had takeaways from all. Your hard work and adaptability and creativity are a model of resilience. And then one last thought from Phyllis. What was the name of that book on leadership, and how do we request it?
It's called Community Leadership in Action. You can access it at vtrural.org. And if you want it, you can just say you want it. We'll mail you a copy for free.
I happen to know that the requester lives in Montpelier.
She can stop in the office tomorrow. We're upstairs above the North Branch Cafe.
Great. Okay, great. Stephanie just posted that link in the chat. Paul, this has been such a stimulating and delightful conversation. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. This has really been tremendous. Thanks everyone for sticking with us and your great questions on the chat. This has really been a wonderful end to the Conservation Summit this year, and we just can't thank you all enough for your support. So thanks everybody, and cheers, Paul.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.